Fed up with the inefficiencies of government? Think the planning system is too restrictive, or maybe not restrictive enough? Concerned about government measures designed to tackle runaway inflation? Well, this week's agenda might well have the answer for you. Clerk of Tynwald Jonathan King talks us through how to present a petition to Tynwald. We also hear from campaigner Bridge Carter, who is concerned about the lack of a legislative framework for preventing financial crime against elderly and vulnerable people and holding perpetrators to account.
I was appointed Clerk of Tynwald around about a year ago and took up the post in September, so I will soon have done a full year in that post. I was Deputy Clerk of Tynwald for the previous 14 years, so I had a bit of an idea what the job involved when I was appointed, but there's nothing quite like doing it. And I think on Tynwald Day itself, that's when the difference between being Deputy Clerk and being Clerk is going to come to the fore. For various reasons. I think the interaction with the petitioners is certainly a very important factor in that. So the guidance that exists and has done for many years on the Tynwald website is that if you wish to present a petition on Tynwald Day, the first thing you should do is read the guidance, of course. But when you read it, it will say within the guidance, the next thing you should do is talk to the Clerk of Tynwald. And it's a very important service that I provide with my colleagues, but this particular bit of the office is normally done by the clerk personally. The right to approach the Hill and present your petition is unconstrained. Anyone who lives in the island is entitled to do that. However, if you want your petition to go any further, it then has to pass certain tests. So the first thing that will happen after Tynwald Day is the petitions will be read by the Standing Orders Committee of Tynwald. And they have one question to answer for each petition: is it in order or not? And they do that usually within a few weeks, and they issue their report. And the report will include a copy of each petition, including the name of whoever presented it, but not their address these days, and not an image of their signature. But you do put your name into the public domain, and you put into the public domain the issue on which you're campaigning. If it is found to be in order by the committee, then the petition can be picked up by a Tynwald member any time in the next 5 years, and that member, which can be an MHK or an MLC, they put your petition forward for debate, and then Tynwald as a whole will decide whether to take it any further. They may decide not to, and that would be the end of it. Or they may decide to set up a committee or refer it to an existing committee for further investigation. And if the petition goes to a committee, you as the petitioner will be invited to come in and talk about your petition to the committee on the record. That's usually done in public with the press present and the audio being streamed over the Tynwald website, so everybody in the world potentially can hear what you've got to say. Although there are cases where the topic is so sensitive that it has to be done in private, and in that case the relevant evidence will be published later. As I said a minute ago, the first hurdle the petition has to pass is to be deemed in order by the Standing Orders Committee, and the Standing Orders Committee will consider the petition in the light of the rules of order, which are that every petition for redress must relate to a matter of public interest, must relate to a matter falling within the province of Tynwald, and this is the big one, must not relate to any specific case which could be or has been adjudicated upon by the High Court or any tribunal or arbitration or any formally officially recognised complaints procedure, unless the petition shows that in the particular circumstances it is not reasonable to expect the petitioner to resort or to have resorted to such remedy. I say that's the big one, Phil, because that's the one quite a lot of petitioners trip up on. You can only ask Tynwald to do something which Tynwald can do. Tynwald cannot adjudicate an individual case. So the way I always explain it to people is that if you, for example, are offended by your neighbour's extension, you cannot go to Tynwald and say that extension should be pulled down. That's a matter for the courts. What you can say is that extension has caused me a grievance and I haven't been able to get it pulled down through using the courts because it turns out it was actually lawfully erected and had permission and all the rest of it. Therefore, you say to Tynwald, this shows that the system is wrong. And if you can persuade the Standing Orders Committee that that system defect is a matter of public interest, it doesn't just apply to you, but could cause other people similar grievances in the future, then it's in order. I had a quick look before coming up here at the figures for the last year, last year's report, which takes us back 5 years worth of petitions. And in 2021, there were 11 petitions in order, one of which has so far been picked up. In 2020, there were 4 in order, none of them picked up. In 2019, that was a really big year, we had 23 in order and 4 have been picked up. So you get the impression that, being picked up by a member of Tynwald is actually a bit of a minority of petitions. It doesn't mean they don't have an impact, because the petitioners are often approached by the Manx Radio and all the other media providers on Tynwald Day, and they will gain a bit of public attention in that way. And of course, looking at it from the point of view of the issue rather than the petitioner, there are many ways in which an issue can find its way to the floor of Tynwald. So, for example, as I read through the report we did last year, citing the petitions, we had in 2019 dignity in dying. That's now the subject of a private member's bill. The person moving the private member's bill hasn't mentioned the petition, but nevertheless, that issue is being taken forward. And there are other examples. The treatment of ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, was the subject of a petition in the same year, in 2019, and it hasn't been made into a select committee, but it has been the subject of a general debate in Tynwald, and I think political action is happening. So I think the route that I've described of getting your petition picked up and becoming its own special select committee is not the only way in which you can affect change.
Final question then, in terms of presenting a petition to Tynwald, effectively, people can just turn up on the day and present them, but your strong advice would be to pick up the phone at least and speak to you in advance of presenting a petition.
That's exactly right. The right is there. You may approach the Hill with your petition without any prior consultation. There's no specific form that you have to fill in or button you have to press. You just come to Tynwald and you present your petition. However, to get the most out of the process, I strongly encourage people to talk to me first.
There's more on petitions on the extended podcast, but Bridge Carter has been pursuing the route of getting a private member's bill moved.
Financial abuse quite simply means taking advantage of vulnerable, elderly, dependent people for financial gain, and it can be perpetrated in many ways. The common ways are forging signatures of that vulnerable person, forcing an individual to change legal documents like a will or a power of attorney, charging them too much for home repairs, things like that, use of credit cards. The two worst commonly used are like gaslighting and undue influence. So it's how you manage to manipulate that individual for your own gain at the end of the day. Well, it actually happened to me. Well, not me personally. It happened to a member of my family. At the outset, you have no concept of what's happening. You have an idea that something's not right. It doesn't fit into place. But unless you're aware of these signs, you know what's happening. You haven't got a clue. So you just you just amble along. It's not until after the event that it all sort of hits home. You start investigating yourself, figuring it all out. And then the further along the path you go, you realise that actually there's no legislation in place to stop that kind of abuse. Even if you've got a rock solid case, you put it together yourself, everything's there. It's actually it's a pattern of abuses. So it's, for instance, you've got your domestic abuse bill, and in that you'll see a pattern of abuses. The legislation in that bill is standalone, and you can refer to aspects of it to make a bigger picture. Unfortunately, with elder people, they're not a consideration in that domestic abuse bill. They are of an age where they are easily manipulated, much more so, I think, than the younger generation. But let's face it, we are all easily manipulated. It's just down to the right environment at the time and everything, isn't it, really? So they're also very trusting, aren't they? And because majority of this happens, it's committed by family members. So of course it happened to me. You can't imagine that your own family would do something like that. Your family love you, right? Why would they? Well, it's not even an issue, is it? but it's more likely family members that do commit these crimes. And of course, if you're a parent, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother, whatever, if you're terminally ill, it depends on the situation you're in. Then you're just really grateful to have the help, somebody there. And you've got to bear in mind that a lot of these people are on drugs, medical drugs. There's different types of drugs. So if you're terminally ill, you're going to be on end-of-life care drugs, and they're varied. There's so many different types, and mixing certain drugs can cause an effect that can make you more pliable to the perpetrator. Overdosing, over-medicating, and under-medicating, things like that can make you more pliable, make you more susceptible to abuses. People will drip feed poisonous lies into your mind about other family members. They'll go out of their way. They will do whatever they can to keep you in a position where they are the ones who would benefit from this. And it's, right down to, we're talking about it all over the world now. It's much more open to talk about gaslighting, for instance. That was never talked about up until, I think it's a resurgence of things like that. Gaslighting encompasses lots of different things. A basic idea is, so suppose I took your keys. We lived together. I took your keys and I hid them. You knew where you put them. I picked them up and moved them somewhere. In fact, I didn't. I just hid them completely. And you're looking for them, and you're like, well, I know I put them here. Well, you couldn't have done. And then I suddenly think, right, I know where they are. And I go, I remember you put them here. That sort of thing. It's more messing with your mind, your phone, your mobile phone, things like that, not charging up your battery. It just telling you things like, oh, you remember you said such and such thing, and no, you didn't. And it's gaslighting is where you're telling somebody something's happened that didn't really happen. You're convincing them that what they've done is something they did do, but they haven't done it. It's just mind games.
And presumably the difficulty with all this is potentially, you could have competing interests, in families. One member of the family will think this is the right way to deal with the elderly relative. Another member of the family thinks that it's the complete opposite of what the other member thinks. So in terms of the courts trying to understand these situations, it must be quite difficult if a judge has to make judgments on these things with no clear legislation in place for them to follow. It must be quite difficult to weigh up one person's word effectively against another.
It's a minefield. They couldn't. It's not going to be possible because it's one word against the other unless you've got proof, evidence, and a lot more people do. They are more aware. For instance, your doctor's going to put you on a lot of medication, so usually the family members, the carers, shall we say, would probably list down that medication. They would say to the doctor, I'm going to record all of this because I don't want to make it, I don't want to over-medicate, under-medicate. I need to understand what she's on, he's on, how much she needs, he needs. And of course, the dosages do vary over time because you become used to it, don't you? So you need a bit more, or that doesn't work, so you need to be taken off that and something else. But you need to learn that you have to taper them off and things like that, obviously. So most people would record it in one way or another, whether it was verbally, written on a what do you call it, your iPhone thing, record what's going on, what's being said. So of course, when you've got lots of things that says that's happened, this has happened, that's happened, they're not trained to understand all these different concepts of what's happened. They're only interested in really what's this bit here. I'm trained to do that. That's my department. That's somebody else's department. So it's kind of like Piccadilly Circus. It's all over the place. And you could find legislation in an act, for instance, the fraud or forgery or whatever, different acts. But then you've got to tie that in with something else. And what you haven't got is the bigger picture. You haven't got, which is what standalone legislation is. And
are there examples of standalone legislation covering this in other parts of the world? Yeah.
In America, for instance, California, I've reached out to so many people all over the world who are willing, who have sent in information that would help us to establish our own here. The chief prosecutor, Paul Greenwood, from California, he he actually he created the legislation for California. He wrote that. He sent me a Word version of the legislation, given permission for us here on Ireland to utilise that for our own benefit. And it was accepted here. And even the draftsperson or people came back and said, not to me, but to the person who I put it forward to, because you can't obviously take it yourself, and confirmed that, yeah, they could work with that. And it was an exciting phase, because people were starting in the relevant, the powers that be, shall we say, were looking at it and finally starting to see what it was all about and why it was relevant.
It sounds like it should be linked in some way to the capacity bill, and yet the capacity bill really doesn't cover this at all, does it?
No, not really. In fact, the capacity bill, there was a poll in relation to the capacity bill where people were offered given the chance to give their 4 penny or 2 penny on what was there, and a lot of people put in information in relation to the capacity bill. A lot of the things in that people wanted was an independent capacity representative, because this is a lot to do with your power of attorney and stuff like that, which you can have a power of attorney, but you can't guarantee that the person who's got power over you as a vulnerable person is a responsible, trustworthy person. So in the UK, in Scotland, various places around the world, they have their own capacity bill, but they've all got independent capacity representatives. I think they're called something different over there. And that's a person who's employed to ensure the safety of the person for which a power of attorney has been granted over. So basically that person isn't as vulnerable. But we haven't put that in, and that poll ask for people's opinion, and I gave you a should you agree, strongly agree, agree, all the different scenarios, and everybody, the vast majority came back and said strongly agree. So I think, it's like the majority by a long shot wanted an independent representative, so surely that's a basic human right anyway, isn't it? I mean, And
you've tried to get a private member effectively a private member's bill picked up by a member, and that's not making much progress either.
I've had meeting after meeting over the years with various people. I've been on various radio shows where I have emphasised areas of concern, and people have come back to me via the radio station or through work and said, lawyers have come to me and said, oh my gosh, yeah, we have this happens a lot, vulnerable abuse, this kind of stuff with wills and things like that. But it's a minefield, because it's not as complex when you understand it, but on the outside looking in, it's complex. It's like it goes off in so many different directions, but all of it is a pattern of abuse. And once you can see the pattern of abuse, it's very much the same. It's just it's just perpetrated by different people of different backgrounds who it's done in a different way. Does that make sense? So it's all pretty much textbook. So
in a way, I mean, it's a bit like, I suppose, using an example of something that would have been introduced in not too long ago, racially aggravated crime. This is a new thing to specifically deal with a particular problem. So the kinds of problems that you're describing are things that you would think bits of law in different places. It can't be right, you would think, under the law, for someone to manipulate someone into doing something they don't want to do. However, because of the specific circumstances of people who are beginning to lose their mental capacity to make decisions on their own behalves, it gets it's a more confused situation. Therefore, you need a specific piece of legislation which considers all the angles and deals with it.
Absolutely. There are cases crawling out the woodwork now. I mean, since I've been on this campaign, people have been coming to me with their own cases for me to put them together so that they can see if they've got a case to answer. Because you don't always have a case to answer. There are disgruntled people out there who didn't get left money in a will and stuff. So of course, but there are valid reason for that. But they are still disgruntled. So you've got to weed out what's right and what's wrong. So what I do in my position at work is to put that case together. Because I've now, with working in the law in different areas, paralegal and stuff like that, I have an ability, and having had my own case exactly the same, have an ability to see those patterns of abuses, which is handy. But you put it all together, there's nowhere to go even when you've got it, because unless you've got a vast amount of funds, how are you going to afford to take that further? Because not a lot of the lawyers are trained. In fact, when I did my own matter, I hit so many brick walls. It was incredible. I thought, well, where do I go from here? Luckily, in my position, the company I work for, I have contact with QCs and various people in the UK who kind of came back to me with other legislation their side and said, well, try it there, see how you go. I managed to get a bit further, but the end result was you haven't got a case to answer as far as the AGs are concerned, because it's not what's the interest of the people. There's a terminology they use, so it's not in the best interest of the people or something like that. And it so is. It's just incredible in my mind. This is the 21st century, and this is an abuse that is not even acknowledged. It is so easy. It's a crime. It's easy to commit. I mean, we've had local ones recently. I mean, what happens when you take your parents' pennies? They've got no money left. You've spent it. Who looks after these people? The public purse does then. So although I think they should look after them, that's a whole different ball game. You've got the government crying out for money left, right and centre, trying to take people's money off them. And yet they're letting people, perpetrators of that kind, take their own family money and squander it anyway.
If there are any MHKs listening,
I think they're very sick to death of hearing me.
You'd be very, very keen for at least one of them to take up the opportunity of presenting a case for a private member's bill. And the great news is it appears to be a quick win, because there's legislation, examples of legislation, which could very quickly be brought into law, and box ticked, MHK able to brag at the next election that they've done a good job. Which
is what happened on the last, what do you call it, when they all got together again, the new ministers got involved. It was all there, set, ready to go, ready to rock and roll, and I even got an email to say it was likely going to be in the capacity bill. But as standalone legislation in the capacity bill, it all made sense. It finally, after all those years, hit the right people. When you break it down so they understand it, it's not knocking on your door, it's not cold calling, it's not scamming people for money over the telephone from Nigeria and stuff like that. It's on your doorstep, it's in your home, it's your next door neighbour. Not everybody's next door neighbour, I'm just highlighting the obvious. And so then it just, after the new administration got involved, it just got sent off to the cyber area, so it went off with the people who knocking on the door scams. And it was a bit unfair, and I was a bit upset really, because I spent a lot of time trying to make them understand this is what it was about, and they came back just at the right time and said, we got it, we understand it, your legislation, this is what we've got, you've got the draftsman's agreeing with you, everybody's agreeing with you, this is what we need, this is what's going to happen, Bridge, yeah? And bang, gone. Now I'm back to square one. So now I'm like, okay, so poor Alex Allinson, I sent him an email, and at that point I was bored sending everybody emails with bits on it and sort of don't, tap just to get at them, so I just went with the whole sledgehammer. Bang, Alex, this is what's happened, this is what's going on. Oh, and then another email, I'm sorry I forgot to mention this, and then there's this, and I was like, oh my god, he's going to be sick to death of me. But I thought I can't go back and go through all that again. So here, this is the whole kit and caboodle. And for me, luckily, he came back and he said he understood, and as a doctor he had seen these kind of abuses, and he's going to investigate it for me. And now I trust Dr. Alex Allinson, because obviously he has made waves, he has made an impact in areas that we've been fighting for a long time. So hopefully he will find out what happened to the documentation and everything that was heading off in the right direction, why it's gone off in the wrong direction, where it is now and which carpet it's under, drag it out and dust it off and stick it in where it should be.
It would appear we have a significant legislative hole which Bridge's bill would fill. If any MHK listening wants to pick up the bill, Bridge can be contacted at bcarter@crossleys.com. Also, if you have been affected by any of the things Bridge was speaking about, she would be very happy to try to help you. There's more on petitions on the extended podcast, which is available on Manx Radio's website. Please get in touch with Phil Gorn at manxradio.com and let me know your thoughts and views on the show. But for now, I'm Phil Gorn, Guramayu. Thanks for listening.